All right, so let's say that God showed up to you and told you that he was going to destroy the city that was right next door to where you live. And let's say that this was going to happen. And if you knew that this was going to happen and God says, hey, I'm going to destroy the city right next to you, would you ask him the question, what about the people who are the righteous? What about the people who are in there who are doing the things for you? Is that a question that you might ask? Because that's a question that I would ask, because I'm like, you're about to destroy that city over there. I know that city's not very good, but what about the people who are worshiping you and follow you? What about those people? Now, this is interesting because that's exactly what takes place in Genesis chapter 18. In Genesis chapter 18, this is where God shows up and he has a conversation with Abraham, and he lets Abraham know that there is going to be destruction that falls upon the city next door to him. And so with this knowledge, Abraham does what any of us would have done, and he asks the question. And the question that he asks is in verse 23, and it says, and Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now, this question is the million-dollar question. There's a lot of people in the world right now who are wrestling with the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture, a mid-tribulation rapture, or a post-tribulation rapture. But this question that Abraham asks God here is going to reveal a lot of information to us, because we need to remember what Paul tells us in Romans chapter 15. In Romans chapter 15, verse 4, Paul says, for whatever things were written before, meaning in the Old Testament, were written for our learning. So everything that we have in the Old Testament is given to you and I for our learning. And then he goes on that we, through the patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope. I think it's interesting that Paul chose to use the word comfort. Now, how in the world would this bring comfort to us unless it was something that we could hold on to that would give us comfort? And so when we go back to Genesis chapter 18, we're going to see the question that Abraham asks God, and we are going to see how that is going to provide you and I with comfort as well. But just to refresh our memory, the question on the table that Abraham asks is, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? That's the million-dollar question. Is the church going to go through the tribulation, or it is going to be absolutely bombarded with the wicked as well? So in the very next chapter, the angels are in Sodom and they are going to get Lot and his family out of there. And so they show up, and it says in verse 16, it says, and while he lingered, the men, meaning the angels took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters. And then it says this phrase, which I absolutely love, the Lord being merciful to him. Think about that, the Lord being merciful to him, and they, the angels, brought him out and set him outside the city. So the angels show up, they end up getting Lot, and they grab him by the hand and they pull them out of the city. Just imagine that visual for a second, because this answers the question to the one that was posed by Abraham, just that we read in Genesis 18. Remember, the question on the table is, God, are you going to destroy the righteous, meaning Lot, with the wicked? And now we know that righteous, Lot is referred to as righteous in Peter's epistles, because Peter refers to him as being righteous Lot. So in Genesis chapter 19, verse 16, where you see these angels showing up and they brought him out of the city and set him out of the city, this happened before the judgment actually took part. And so the reason why this is so profound is because we are given the answer to the question that Abraham asked in Genesis 18. God, are you going to destroy the righteous with the wicked? And this answers the question, because no, God did not destroy the righteous with the wicked. That is very important to understand. But to complete the picture here, in Genesis chapter 19, verse 22, the angels say to Lot, hurry, escape to the city, Zoar. And then the angels say, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. And so these angels allow us to get a little bit of their marching orders. The angels tell us very clearly that they physically cannot do anything until Lot and his family is safe. And so once Lot and his family was safe, then fire and brimstone fell out of the heavens and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities there. My point here is to get you to understand that there was an order of operations. And so going back to the question in Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham asked the question that we all are wondering about, or at least a lot of people in the world are trying to figure out in a pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-tribulation rapture, we are learning from these things because of what Paul says in Romans 15, where he says the things that were written before were written for our learning. And so when we read this whole chapter, Genesis 18 and 19, and we read about the judgment that Abraham knew was going to happen right around the corner, the question that naturally arises is the one that Abraham asked. And he's like, God, are you going to destroy the righteous with the wicked? And the answer is given to us in Genesis 19, and it is demonstrated to us by the angels physically removing Lot and his family before. And so that is the important thing to understand. They were removed before judgment came. And so the question, are you going to destroy the righteous with the wicked? The answer is given to us in Genesis 19, no. No, he's not going to destroy the righteous with the wicked. And so, in my opinion, I believe that this speaks to a pre-tribulation viewpoint. I believe the rapture is going to happen first, and then after the rapture, then a tribulation, a 7-year tribulation is going to take part after that. And so that's just my opinion, secondary issue at the end of the day. But I think that this is very provocative, especially when you couple it with Romans 15, where we are told that all things that were written before were written for our learning. So the question on the table is, what are we learning from Genesis 18 and 19, other than the very obvious wickedness that was taking place in Genesis 18? There's more to it, and hopefully this video kind of helps expound your understanding. If it does, let me know. Thanks.